Hello, Master Barrett. Welcome to the podcast.
Mr. Katz, how are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks for having me. What's the official name again of this podcast, by the way?
So we have five masters. So it's the Five Masters podcast. We got five different people coming on, two of which just got their masters, and you are one of them. Congratulations on that.
Thank you, thank you. I guess that makes me the youngest also of the
Yeah.
Five Masters and the Five Masters podcast, huh?
So
Excellent.
you actually graduated from Marshall High School, where we're
True,
gonna.
yes.
Yeah. All right.
Yes, yes. And you are a current Marshall High School student, so I guess this project is for Marshall. And tell me, what is the audience? Is it more, your student, fellow classmates might listen to it, or is it just for the teachers? Or
So I'm trying to make it so that anybody can listen to it, right? It. I'm trying to maintain the entertainment for people who are in Taekwondo. So we're not explaining too much about what it is, but still enough for somebody to follow if they're not in Taekwondo and not familiar with the language we use, right? So we're trying to explain some of the terms that might be kind of only in our circle and what they mean. All right. So the first question is, how old were you when you started doing martial arts?
so I started Taekwondo when I was 6.5 years old. I was started with my dad and my sister. The three of us started together. I have a sister who's a year older. And because I was starting with my dad and my sister, I typically at 6.5 would have been put in the younger kids class. We call knee-high ninjas. But I was actually able to start in the junior, leave me behind. So 6.5 was January 27th, 1999 was my start date, if I remember that correctly.
All right. So it's been a couple of years.
What is that? 22 years. Yeah, 22 years.
Wow. All right. So how many of those years have you been teaching?
So I started working for Master Rhee at the Jhoon studio in Falls Church when I was 15 and a half. So that was March of 2008. So what does that put me at? 13 years, almost to the month. 13 years of teaching. Yes, that's right.
Wow. So that's about a little less than half your life. Wow. All right. So where has your Taekwondo journey taken you, either emotionally, physically, mentally?
Okay, yeah, I like it. Good question. We jump right into the big stuff. Well, let's start with the easy one first. Let's start with physically. I have traveled. I guess the farthest I've traveled would be for tournaments. I've gone down to tournaments in Florida, Orlando, at Disney World, Daytona, Florida. I've been to tournaments in Chicago. I've been to some tournaments actually up in Connecticut. So those are probably the greatest physical distances I've traveled for martial arts. Emotionally, that's a bigger question, right? Where has it taken me emotionally? I think it's really been sort of a groundwork and foundation for the person I am today. The basic premise in Taekwondo, one of the first things you learn is you have to get good grades. You have to be an honor roll student. And from a young age, I was always motivated to get straight A's in school. And I would say that's almost entirely from Taekwondo. My parents, though they encouraged me to do well in school, I think would have been fine with me being an average student. But having the sort of positive peer pressure from Taekwondo definitely encouraged me, pushed me, motivated me to be the best student I could be academically. And then I could also comment on how teaching has sort of empowered me to be the best I can possibly be for the students that I'm teaching, being a role model, being a positive person in many young kids' lives when they're growing up. They're looking up to me, which just encourages me to continue to work on myself, not just in martial arts and being the best I can be at my taekwondo, at my skill, at my ability level, but also just being a good person in general, because when you're influencing young kids, young minds who are growing, you want to influence them in the right way. And I think that's always been a big push for me to be the best person I can be, so that the people that are looking up to me are looking up to someone that's worth looking up to.
Yeah, you talked about this a little earlier. Do you want to go into kind of the philosophy behind Taekwondo and why we need to get good grades in order to progress throughout the belts?
Sure. This really stems back to Grandmaster Rhee, the father of American Taekwondo, Jhoon Rhee, and he pinpointed early on that the academics and good grades in school is really a stepping stone to bigger picture success in the long term. So he made all of his students be on the honor roll, be an A, B average student in order to get their black belt. And I think that's really, even though Grandmaster Rhee has passed away, we're still upholding a lot of his teachings and the way he believed martial arts should be. He said, without philosophy, Taekwondo is nothing but street fighting. So the idea that there's more than just kicking and punching that we're doing in martial arts, there is life skills behind it that really emphasize or make it more than just a regular sport. I think it's more of a way of life in general.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of meeting Grandmaster Rhee a couple of times. I think my black belt exam was one of the last ones he made it to, and that was really an honor. And he told us one thing, and that was never to lie. And that's really stuck with me ever since. Let's see, it's probably been about almost 4 years now since I got my first degree black belt. So, do you remember why you started doing Taekwondo?
Sure. I just wanted to tell a quick story because you were talking about him saying never lie. He used to talk about, it was just making me think about how he would talk about if you teach children from a young age to never lie, they'll form a habit. They'll develop a habit at a young age.
Sorry, you're breaking up a little there.
Of their life, and this idea that if everybody was on it, we would be able to have a hey.
Sorry, you're breaking up a little there. Could you repeat what you just said?
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was just talking about the idea of Grandmaster Rhee believed if you taught children from a young age to be honest, that they'll grow up to be honest people. And he was sharing a book that he wrote in the last few years of his life called Trutopia. It's basically the idea that if everybody told the truth all the time, we could have a true utopia, hence the name Trutopia. And he believed it was possible, but it had to start from the time you have to start teaching honesty to children, because by the time you're an adult, it's too late. You're already used to telling lies. But if you can isolate it from childhood, you can carry that habit and grow up to be humanly perfect, he would say. Humanly perfect.
When we did the black belt test, we had to memorize the Truth, Beauty, Love Creed, the TPL Creed. And the general gist of it is it started with you telling the truth and it ended with you being happy. So that all stems from people telling the truth, like you talked about.
Do you remember that whole thing?
Let's see.
He
When I
said,
tell the truth, my heart is beautiful. When my heart is beautiful, everybody loves me. When everybody loves me, I am happy.
right, exactly. And then TBL was the acronym Truth, Beauty, Love, kind of the representative of that longer saying.
Yep. So let's get back to that question. Why did you start doing Taekwondo?
So I actually started Taekwondo with my dad and my older sister, like I said before. And the reason was my dad actually grew up in the DC area seeing the Nobody Bothers Me commercials on TV. And he is one of 5 boys, and having 5 siblings growing up, his parents couldn't afford putting all 5 into Taekwondo. So therefore, he never got a chance to be a Taekwondo student as a kid. So when I got old enough to do Taekwondo, he actually signed himself, my sister, and me all up at the same time. So it was really never even my idea in the first place.
Right. So going off that, why have you continued? What do you like about it? Why haven't you stopped yet?
Yeah, good question. I guess it goes, well, I guess I could talk even more about the beginning. Early on, there were times where I would say I didn't even enjoy Taekwondo. And it was, like I was saying, something that wasn't my choice to do in the first place. And because my dad and older sister were also students, I really had no option to quit. And getting my black belt was never a decision that I got to make, actually. It was something that I started at such a young age that I don't really even remember even the thought crossing my mind that I could stop at any point. It was just part of a family activity that we did. You know, same thing as like going to school or going on a family vacation. It was just part of my childhood. And
Yeah.
then after I got my black belt, my sister stopped. And then shortly after that, my dad injured his knee and he had to stop. And that was right around the time that I was getting close to getting my 2nd degree black belt at about age 14 or 15. And it seemed like I was pretty close, so I continued towards my 2nd degree black belt. And then soon after I got my 2nd degree black belt, I was offered a teaching position by Master Rhee. And I think that was really the turning point for me, where Taekwondo changed from something that was just like part of my life that I never really, I never hated Taekwondo, but I wasn't overly thrilled about it either. It was just kind of a neutral thing that I never thought one way or the other towards. But when I started teaching, that was really a turning point for me. That's really when I started to feel that I loved Taekwondo. And what I loved about it was the empowerment of teaching someone and them understanding, and you could see the light in a kid's eyes when they get it and they've grasped a new concept. And that was really, I would say, what changed is once I started teaching, I fell in love with Taekwondo.
Yeah. For me, I think that happened right when I got my first degree, black belt. Before then, I was really struggling with motivation. And if you want, you can talk a little bit on motivation and how you can overcome that struggle later. For me, I didn't really want to go to classes at the rank just before black. We call it first brown. But as soon as I got my black belt, it was a lot more individual. The teacher could say, work on this, go. And it wasn't necessarily them telling you what to do. It was you figuring out what to do on your own and then doing it and having that self motivation. I think I really got that at black belt. And the first tip for black belt, which is kind of like once you hit first degree, you have to go through all of the belts again, except at black belt. And I got most improved, and then I worked my way up. And near the end, I got outstanding marks. And then I got offered a job. It's really, you really just have to find and hit that point where you've overcome the hardships and found that self motivation. I think that's when it gets a lot better.
Right. I agree. And yeah, I'd love to talk to maybe later on in the podcast, but talk a little bit about, my experience watching you kind of progress and come up through the belts, because I've seen, I remember you being younger and kind of being sort of average, a little bit under the radar. And then I remember when something kind of changed in you, there was this spark, and your technique, the way you worked in class, I mean, everything just started going exponentially up. And it was really cool to see, in a relatively short amount of time, how quickly you got it and you really improved. And, it was, what got you onto the demo team, and we can talk about that later as well. But I sort of identified this spark in you, and I think that only also drove you to work harder and harder and keep improving from there.
Yeah. So I think I hit that point when I pushed myself past what was comfortable. So I would leave every class with my legs hurting, and I would leave every class extremely tired. And that made me stronger for the next class. Then I could do the exact same thing up and up and up until I got stronger, until I got better. Uh, and I noticed that as well. I noticed myself getting, and that also snowballs to self motivation, right? uh, Once you see improvement, it's a lot easier to improve. So,
Right.
what is your favorite part of Taekwondo? I know there's a lot of things that you enjoy. If you had to pick one, what would be your favorite part?
Well, when you asked me earlier on, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to say, but now that I'm hearing the question again, it's so obvious that it's definitely teaching for me is my favorite part. And I just feel a great amount of joy from teaching a class. And 101, large classes, young Mihai ninjas, we have teenagers and adults. For me, it's definitely teaching, and that's just my favorite part. I do love the kicks. I love, high, flashy, cool kicks. I definitely love that on the physical side of it. But if you were to ask me what my favorite thing is, it would be the teaching of Taekwondo.
Yeah, you lead staff classes, so you're actually teaching the teachers how to teach.
Yeah, and that actually has been the most rewarding part of my job. And it's something that only kind of arose out of COVID and a little bit of a restructuring or reorganizing of or reallocating of staff time that was necessary during the pandemic that put me in that position to lead the staff training. But yes, it has definitely, not only do I have such a passion for teaching, but then if I could understand what I'm doing, what I'm teaching, and then explain that to another person who is just learning how to teach, to somehow accelerate their growth as a teacher. It's exciting for me. It's definitely a passion that I have.
So you talked about how that or how staff classes stemmed from the COVID pandemic. Do you want to talk about what challenges that brought up while teaching martial arts? Because we transitioned very early on to entirely Zoom. And then we started opening up hybrid. And do you want to talk about what the challenges were and how you overcame those challenges?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic. I remember pretty much everything. It's exactly a year ago, or a year and a few weeks ago, that the studio was forced to close its physical doors due to mandates for COVID restrictions. And from the Saturday, that was the first day that we had to close our physical doors. The following Friday, we launched our first virtual class over Zoom. So not even 7 days after closing down, we had our first test pilot Zoom class. I don't remember, did you participate in that one by any chance? Do you remember that?
I don't remember exactly. I know I participated in the first one I had the opportunity to. And I remember even before the anybody thought the pandemic would get as serious as it is currently, I remember thinking if I stop doing it for too long, I'm going to fall out of shape. I'm going to fall out of practice, and it's just not going to look as good as it used to.
Sure, right, exactly. And so that Friday, like I was saying, just 6 days after we physically closed our doors, we launched a test pilot class with just black belts. And Master Shackelford that week had delegated the responsibility to me to research all the various platforms that we could potentially use for online classes. And Zoom was sort of the obvious choice. I mean, now talking about Zoom, everybody uses Zoom. And of course, it seems like the obvious choice. But then it was early on, and Zoom wasn't quite popular yet. So I did some research, and it looked like Zoom would be the most promising. And obviously, a year later, and knowing how popular Zoom is, it's definitely was the right choice. And like we said at the beginning, being the youngest master instructor at the studio, I felt that I was pretty well equipped and comfortable with not only technology but being on camera. And I said to Master Shackelford and Master Pineda, let's set up an iPad on a tripod and point it at me, and let's get the black belts to show up, and I'll teach the first class. And at that time, now that we've been doing it for a year, it doesn't seem that revolutionary, but in the moment, it felt like, wow, this is the start of something new. And I know at that time, Master Shackelford and Master Pineda were not fully able to wrap their head around the idea of how a virtual class would work or what it would look like. And we launched that first pilot class, and then 2 days later, that coming Monday, or 3 days later, we had a full week schedule of Nihai Ninja classes and white belt through black belt classes. So like you said, we did really respond very, very quickly at the beginning of the pandemic and rolled out a fully virtual schedule in about 7 days.
Yeah, I think this pandemic has shown people what is possible to do online. And I think for a lot of things, it's going to be hard to switch back. Uh, so talking about that virtual element, right? What curriculum did we do in person that we can't do online?
Right? Yeah. So obviously, I mean, and maybe it's not obvious, but sparring is a huge part of Taekwondo, and it actually stems back to Grandmaster Rhee inventing safety equipment. And we would put, and still do, and this is gear that Grandmaster Rhee himself invented, but foam hand pads and foam foot pads and a headgear, mouth guard, a face shield, a chest guard. And students are able to physically kick and punch each other without sustaining injuries. Really, the only time injuries happen is if somebody is doing something they're not supposed to do. But if done correctly, sparring is very safe. Obviously, with no in-person classes and social distancing, sparring has been virtually eliminated in the last year. There really has been no option for sparring. We do sort of simulated sparring matches over Zoom, where students are facing each other on the camera, on the screen, and almost like a video game. If somebody goes up high, you gotta put your arm up to block something high, or if they go down low, you gotta be ready to block low or move left or right to avoid certain attacks, and then defend when it's time to defend. But other than that, there really is not any physical contact. So I would say that that's definitely the biggest hurdle in terms of virtual only. We had some students who, when the pandemic hit and we moved over to Zoom, kind of said that honestly, their favorite part of Taekwondo was the sparring, and that virtual just really didn't interest them. Whereas other students who maybe were a little more apprehensive to spar, students that I would say maybe are a little bit more introverted or don't do as well with the possible distractions of a large class. They were able to focus a little bit more in a Zoom format, since it was a little bit more quiet space, a little bit more isolated. So we've kind of seen it both ways, right? Some people have done great virtually, and some people, unfortunately, have quit because of it.
So going off of that, something new that the virtual aspect brought was spotlighting, right? The ability to put somebody in front of the entire class without actually bringing them up to the front of the class and being able to show off somebody's technique. That came as a shock to me because I started as a student when we were doing virtual, and just following normally like the class does, and then all of a sudden being put on the spotlight was a little bit of a shock. How do you think you saw that in other classes?
It's really something where we're all kind of using our best judgment to determine whether the student is going to react positively towards it. Obviously, our hope would be to use it as a motivation tool and to empower them to feel good, and maybe make them push themselves a little bit more than they would without that extra attention, without that extra focus.
Yeah.
But I'm sure the opposite has been true too, where maybe someone's more self-conscious and now they're being put up on the spotlight, and that could actually do the reverse, could demotivate them. And part of another big challenge on Zoom has been a good majority of the classes, students are muted on Zoom. We can't hear what they're saying. And sometimes it's harder to anticipate or predict how a student's going to react or feel, or even after the fact, tell how they felt about it, because maybe they don't really react with any visual cues. And because we can't hear them, we don't know. But
Yeah.
my intuition is that the majority of the time, it is a positive tool and does not only motivate that individual student, but then other students in class are kind of rising up to the occasion with a little bit of friendly competition, right?
Yeah. Uh, so moving away from the virtual aspect, when we're in studio or when we were in studio, we would turn away from the flags to tie our belts and fix our uniforms. Do you want to explain why we do that or why you think that's important?
Sure. Yeah, just to kind of explain the format or the layout of the studio, we would have a Korean and an American flag up at the very front where the instructors would typically stand and would be in the direction that the class would bow in and say our student creed, which is what we recite, the words that we recite before each class. So Grandmaster Rhee was an extremely patriotic person, not just patriotic towards his home country of Korea, which you would expect, but also, and maybe even more so, patriotic of the United States of America. And he saw it as this opportunity. The United States gave him all this opportunity to create a huge martial arts system with thousands of black belts over decades and decades. So he was really grateful for the United States. So always made sure that there were both a Korean flag and an American flag, where you would think maybe possibly in a Korean martial arts it would only be a Korean flag, but both flags up at the front of the classroom. Now, like you said, tying our belt or fixing our uniform, these are things that, out of respect to the flags, we would actually turn away, turn 180 degrees away from the flag, tighten our belt. And this is just sort of like respect. I mean, the same sort of idea as taking your hat off for the Pledge of Allegiance at a sporting game. The idea that the floor, our martial arts way of showing that the flag is more than just a piece of material, but is really a symbol for the United States and then for Korea. And out of respect, we would always face away from the flags every time we tie our belt.
Yeah. And going off those flags as symbols, up until recently, I think I talked about this a little bit with Master Grenada. We held an American flag in our right hand and a Korean flag in our left hand when doing forms to either the Korean or the American national anthem. And just holding those as we go through the form to the music. I'm curious, have you trained in any other martial arts other than Taekwondo?
Yes, I have actually. I have studied Tai Chi. Tai Chi is a Chinese martial art. And if you've seen ever, typically an older generation, and it's often done outdoors. If you ever see elderly people in like a park, for example, doing or maybe you've seen this in movies, very slow, graceful, slow motion martial art. I've been studying Tai Chi for about 9 years, and I have a brown sash in Tai Chi.
All right. So what does that mean? What does a brown sash mean in Tai Chi?
Yeah, so the Tai Chi system that I'm part of actually is in their ranking very similar to the Taekwondo system, because the instructors are actually also Jhoon Taekwondo black belts. They started Taekwondo first and then learned Tai Chi later on. So when they created their system, they made the belt order the same. So brown belt is 2 steps away from black belt. There's also a belt called first brown belt, and then black belt would be the next one after that. So as a second brown belt, I'm fairly close to black belt, but not quite there.
Yeah, so the belts in our system go white, gold, orange, green, purple, blue, red, second brown, first brown, black belt. And then I also want to ask, what is unique to Tai Chi and what is unique to Taekwondo?
Sure, sure. So like I said, the big element of Tai Chi being slow motion, and that being almost a form of moving meditation. So it's a very relaxing martial art. In contrast, Taekwondo, sparring, for example, you're getting your heart rate very elevated, your adrenaline might be pumping. Tai Chi is very opposite to that, in your breathing is very slow, the movements are very graceful and calm, though it is a form of self-defense. When doing the forms, you do not do them quickly. Everything is done very slow and controlled. Another large, pretty significant difference, and I'm not sure if you know this one or not, that you might find this interesting. The premise of Tai Chi is the basic movement pattern is circular in your hand motions. So everything that you're doing is rounded
Yeah,
and kind of based on a sphere. Whereas
that
Taekwondo is very linear, a lot of straight punches, straight chops, straight as quickly as you can from point A to point B. Tai Chi has this round circular motion to it.
if I recall correctly, that's in a lot of Chinese styles as well, right?
Correct, right. Wushu, more commonly known as Kung Fu, is the same premise, this circular movement pattern. So everything is sort of flowing, right? Bruce Lee used to talk about flow like water and this sort of softness to your movement. But then at the end, there's power, like a wave coming down and crashing. So very different than Taekwondo, which Taekwondo is really how quickly can you get to your target? How fast and how strong can you strike? Tai Chi, very, very soft, relaxed, but then using a lot of body weight, I think would be another big contrast. If someone is coming in to attack you in Tai Chi, you, in a way, use their weight against them and deflect their energy down towards the ground rather than try to strike them first.
Yeah, so you talked about it a little bit, but what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of each style? So the linear versus the circular, maybe the more methodical versus the sharper angles in each of the styles.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question. And a lot of people actually have even asked me the question, what is the best type of martial art? And what I would say to that question is it depends on the person, because the best martial art for the individual is going to be the one that works best for them. Could be a varying things. It could be interest level. It could be how you feel. Maybe you're not as an aggressive person, and maybe a softer flowing style might better suit your personality type. Maybe you're physically smaller, and therefore using something where you can take down a larger person by using their weight against them is more beneficial to you. So I think it really depends entirely on the person who's performing the martial arts or doing the martial arts, because there's a lot of preference. When you're younger, to doing something that's fast, right? Doing some Taekwondo is very exciting, high flashy kicks, quick movements. The forms look very cool. But I think people will tend to branch out throughout their life and try various forms, and maybe find another one suits them even better.
Yeah. All right. So you talked a lot about the differences, and there's clearly a lot of differences between the two. So what are some of the similarities? I know you said that the two teachers that you have for Tai Chi are Jhoon black belts. So has Taekwondo influenced any of the Tai Chi curriculum, do you think?
Yes, actually, I do. Good question. One of the things that separates Jhoon Taekwondo, I think, from other martial arts is Grandmaster Rhee was very, very specific about how he wanted his curriculum done. And because of that, removed a lot of ambiguity. I'll give you a quick example. Early Taekwondo, our guarding stance, our chumbi position, the guards would be floating in the air. And Grandmaster Rhee said, well, if the guards are floating in the air, all the students are doing it different. Because the air, that would be an ambiguous spot. That's not a definitive point. So Grandmaster Rhee changed that to keeping his guards flat, keeping everyone's guards flat on their chests so that everyone was doing it exactly the same. Now that sort of mindset, and the Tai Chi coaches, Coach Mickey Lee and Melody Lee, utilized that same thought pattern of making Tai Chi very specific. So, which could be even more ambiguous, and have more ambiguity in Tai Chi, because the movements are so soft and flowing. But they made it very specific, where every motion, every technique, every strike had an exact starting point, an exact movement, and an exact ending point. And I think that they are unique in their style of teaching Tai Chi from other Tai Chi studios or Tai Chi instructors, because of that level of specific detail. And that definitely, I believe, came from Jhoon Taekwondo.
All right. So you talked a little bit about how Grandmastery narrowed in a lot of the techniques and removed a lot of the ambiguity. And Junior Taekwondo is very much a living system. So do you want to explain what that means and explain what's changed about it since you started? Some of the major things.
Sure. Just, I mean, in the 22 years since I started Taekwondo, I've seen different iterations of the forms, the techniques. I mean, a simple one, like I was saying, when I was a young student, our chumbi position, our fighting stance, our ready position, our guards were floating in the air and now are flat on our chest. We also used to keep our feet not one foot, but one of your own foot lengths apart, and now it's taught that the heels should be together touching. Some of the angles of some of the chops have changed over the years to be a little bit more in line with the body. For example, some of the high chops, which we used to do way over our head, now are specifically at eye level, so there's another definitive point. So I've seen quite a few changes over the years, and your question being, how is it a living system? It's a living system in that the instructors every few years will come together and evaluate what they're doing and how they're doing it. To one, and the primary reason being making sure everyone's on the same page and teaching the curriculum the same way. But what that does is also opens up a door for changes. And this is why I think Jhoon Taekwondo may be unique compared to other styles of Taekwondo, which are maybe more traditional and stick to the original way things were done. Grandmaster Rhee, though, was an innovator and was always interested in changing things if it made more sense or if it seemed better to improve the martial art. And even though Grandmaster Rhee is no longer with us, his son, Master Chun Rhee, will now be the voice of starting the narrative of if we should make curriculum changes, if we should change anything that makes more sense. Now, from what I've seen, he's very much following in line in his father's footsteps of staying true to the way that his father, Grandmaster Rhee, wanted his curriculum taught. So as far as I know, other than removing the flags from the forms, now we still have the option to do flags at performances, school events, demonstrations could still use flags, but for testing in the black belt exam, Master Rhee did decide to remove the flags and see the technique the way it was originally done with open hand chops and punches. But other than that, there has not been any major changes that I can think of or I know of at the moment. But I do believe pretty strongly that in time there will be another certification ceremony. All the instructors coming together, going through all the curriculum, and at that time, changes will be made, innovations will be made, and the curriculum will continue to be growing, evolving, and living on.
So how, bring it back around to what we were talking about at the beginning, how did entering Taekwondo at the age that you did change your experience? So how did it change because you entered at 6? I know you talked a little bit about how it wasn't your choice to enter. Do you think that influenced how you felt about it?
I do think that, you know, you hear a lot of stories, and one of the things that we make each black belt do is recite a speech. And during these speeches, you often hear some sort of story about how they, you know, peeked their eyes in the window and they wanted to try it because it looked so cool, and they were really motivated to get their black belt. I would say that my story is a little bit different, and I have had, and I did have as a child, points in time where I had lost motivation. Now, for me, quitting was never on the table as a choice, but I think that me as a teacher, it's influenced me where I do notice students who are losing motivation, and I try to figure out what the core issue is, or why they might be losing motivation. How can I inspire them to find motivation? to find excitement, to do something that will help them get to the next level, to get to the next checkpoint, get to the next belt, so that they can be re-inspired and continue reaching their goal, which is hopefully to get a black belt and maybe beyond.
So you brought up earlier demo team. Do you want to explain what that is?
Sure. And then I think this is probably a good point to talk about how I recruited you for the demo team. And that was, would you say that was about 2 years ago now that I recruited you for the demo team?
Maybe not quite 2 years.
A little bit less than 2 years?
Yeah, a little less than 2 years.
Okay. So the demonstration team is sort of an elite group of black belt students. So being a black belt itself is already an elite group because it takes, on average, 4 to 6 years to become a black belt. So of those very few students who reach the level black belt, an even more select group, which I hand chose, comprising of students from both the Jhoon Arlington studio and the Jhoon studio in Falls Church, to represent both schools in public events. So we had performances at Pentagon City Mall, and we've had performances at elementary schools for Heritage Night or International Night, and representing Korea by doing the form to the Korean national anthem, and then other Taekwondo demonstrations. So this was a team that would meet for 1 to 2 hours about once a week, in addition to the regular classes that they're attending, and practice not just techniques that are directly in the curriculum, but also creating forms that were completely original, that could be used for not only demonstration performances, but even competing in martial arts tournaments. So I sort of see demo team as like an outreach program to bring more awareness to Jhoon Taekwondo. And for example, doing a performance at an elementary school, student may never have had that exposure to Taekwondo and then say, wow, that's something that I might want to try. Let me see, let me ask my parents. And then parents are coming up and talking to me. And all of a sudden, they're ready to start their first Taekwondo class the next week. So the demo team really was a pretty powerful tool in terms of getting exposure in a public setting for Jhoon Taekwondo. And I guess this kind of brings me to my story that I was going to tell earlier. We have 2 different studio mat spaces at the Jhoon Arlington studio, right? Floor A and floor B. And remember, like you were saying earlier, black belt class, often black belts are working at their own pace and given some time for independent work. And myself, and I believe it was Master Rome, were each walking around from group to group or from person to person as they were working on their own. And I believe you were working on one of the traditional forms with a sidekick in it. And I cannot remember if it was could have been Waran, but I can't remember exactly the form. But I remember seeing your sidekick, and just since the last time I had seen you, it had changed in height. Your sidekick had gotten even higher. And I said to you, Mr. Katz, I don't know if I called you Mr. Katz back then. I probably called you Ben. I said, Ben, I'm really noticing you're improving. If you keep that up, I'm going to put you on the demo team. Do you remember me saying that to you?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and I don't know if that was a big motivation for you or not, but that really was my hope, because I saw this sort of fire that was igniting in you, and I wanted to sort of see where it could take you, and sort of gave you a little bit of an incentive to keep working hard. And I think it probably contributed, maybe in some way, to you continuing to excel. And
Yeah.
it did. It ended up with me inviting you to the demo team. And now, not too long before COVID hit, which unfortunately we were not able to continue the demo team during the pandemic. But there was, I would say, a good 6 months or more that you were attending demo team practices, would you say?
Yeah. Yeah, I think possibly longer than that. But yeah, there were a good couple months. I do want to say though that that comment did give me some sort of concrete evidence that people were noticing that I was improving, that the instructors were taking notice that I had been putting in all the effort, that I had been trying so incredibly hard. And again, that made me want to work harder.
Right, right. And, for me, not only have I been the leader of the demonstration team, but I was also a former leader of the competition team over at the Jhoon Falls Church location. And I think for me, naturally, I'm looking for talent. And oftentimes when you have a large studio, a lot of attention will go to the students who don't excel as well, which is definitely necessary because we need to help them continue to move forward. But I've not only noticed and put energy towards the students who are on the lower end of their physical abilities and for their level, but also I've put a lot of energy into the students who are at the top of their class in terms of ability and skill. And one of the things I like to do as a teacher is not only helping the students who are struggling, but really push the students who are doing well and make them their best. These students who have high potential, and trying to tap into that potential and see how far we can take it. And I've worked with a lot of students one-on-one to prepare them for tournaments, to prepare them for competition, to prepare them for their black belt exams. And these are students who are already good, but I found a lot of joy in making them even better.
Yeah. All right. Do you have anything else to add?
No, Mr. Katz, I just want to say thank you. And I want to just tell you, if I haven't told you before, that you as an employee of Jhoon Taekwondo, as an instructor, and me being your direct supervisor, I've had a lot of great experience working with you and have found a lot of joy in helping you not only, like I was saying, become your best as a martial artist, but now helping you become your best as a martial arts teacher. And I think you've done a great job, and you're very confident and you're very skilled in martial arts. And those two things together have really made you a great instructor. And I look forward to seeing you continue to progress and continue to grow, and see just like how far you can go in martial arts, but also see how far you can go as a great teacher.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to come on here and answering a few questions. Uh, you're sadly leaving our studio, going to California. I wish
Current,
you luck. Yeah.
yes, thank you. I appreciate it. I plan to stay as involved as I can while virtual is still a possibility. And one of these things that is sort of a silver lining in this COVID world is that I am able to teach for another month as a full-time instructor, even though physically being on the opposite end of the country. But after about a month, I will step down from my full-time position and hopefully, if possible, be able to teach occasionally on Saturdays or when my schedule allows it. So it's definitely not a goodbye, but it will be a change, moving in a kind of different direction and not seeing each other quite as often as much as we have over Zoom and being able to work together during the pandemic. I think I've seen you probably just as much. No, I've probably seen you more virtually than I have seen you in person over the last year, but it really has been great working with you.
Yep. Same too. All right. I'm going to wrap this up.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Katz.